The Heavenly Demon. Can't Live a Normal Life. By Sanchin. Chapter 313. The Greatest Masterpiece. Part 4. Only silence remained. None of the vassals said a word, shocked by the Marquis's demand. Though they respected the Marquis's reputation as the collector, it didn't mean they would let him destroy Valentino's business. There had to be a clear line between business and personal interest. The vassals weren't willing to let the Marquis withdraw the business as he pleased. They couldn't hold a smile, knowing how much money and effort they put into the jewel business. Simmons, who had been serving under Marquis Valentino for 30 years, spoke up. "My lord, I respect your personal interest and your love for your collections. However, we can't accept your demand to withdraw the jewel business just to buy Lord Roman Dimitri's sword. Especially considering how we're only one step away from bearing fruit." "He's right. You need to provide us a reasonable reason to convince us." The vassals raised their voices to support Simmons. They knew the Marquis wasn't a stubborn leader. He had always insisted his vassals raise their voices and give him wise advice whenever he led House Valentino in the wrong direction. Thus, they openly expressed their thoughts without hesitation. If Marquis Valentino hadn't the confidence to convince his aristocrats, he would have accepted their advice and attempted to bid for Roman's new sword without withdrawing from the jewel business. However, he stood firm in his decision. "I understand your concerns. But the reason I want to acquire Lord Roman's blade isn't simply for my interest. The world is changing, even as we speak. Dimitri is no longer a mere dukedom but a leader of the coalition. And as the new leader, it impacts all regions except the two empires." "What do you think that implies?" the Marquis asked. "That Dimitri will be the leader of the new hegemony." "That's right. Valentino is lucky we sat on the right side of the fence. Our future will change depending on what we do now under Lord Roman's rule. Valentino is the wealthiest house of Cairo. It's a known fact most kingdoms are aware of. However, the moment we step outside of this well, we're nothing but a petty frog no one recognizes," he continued. As the Marquis mentioned, the wealthy aristocrats of the kingdoms were nothing but mere frogs in a small well in the eyes of those in the empires. The ones who practically ruled the market system were the aristocrats in the empires. The only reason Valentino never expanded its business was because Valentino was satisfied with its wealth and power in the small well, unlike most aristocrats. It was more than enough for its people to continue their lives peacefully. However, that didn't mean it was a fool who would miss the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity right before its eyes. "I intend to seize this opportunity to enter the mainstream market and become an economic powerhouse on the continent. We will naturally lead the continent's economy once we enter the four kingdoms: Hector, Umberto, Redford, and Frank. The problem is how we will surpass those who have already established businesses in each kingdom. I believe Lord Roman's sword will be the key. House Valentino possesses 2 of 7 great swords forged by Lord Roman, and Dimitri has strongly supported us since the beginning. Thus, the moment we get our hands on the third no-named, our reputation will skyrocket. We will no longer be remembered as the wealthiest house of Cairo but a house supported by Dimitri when we lead the continent's economy." Valentino was a merchant indeed. He was quick at calculating all the benefits he would get for every decision he made. "We have reserved a large number of materials, including steel, food, etc., to prepare for what would happen after the war. My initial plan was to sell these materials in Cairo alone, but now that we have Dimitri's support, Valentino will seize this chance and expand our business across the entire continent. We will no longer be remembered as the wealthiest house of Cairo but as the wealthiest house of Salamander. I can no longer be satisfied being the wealthiest man in Cairo," the Marquis stated in a firm voice. The moment he saw the third no-named before his eyes, he realized he needed to amass his fortune. He learned that with the wealth in a small well, he couldn't afford Roman Dimitri's new swords. As various thoughts crossed his mind, he concluded that he must expand his business across the entire continent to establish a wealth no one could dare challenge. The tables had turned. Simmons was the first to bow his head at the Marquis's plan. "We will do as you please. We will do as you please." Their eyes sparked fervently with great passion, dreaming of becoming the continent's new economic powerhouse in the future. The meeting concluded. With most people gone, a knight who had escorted the Marquis to Dimitri quietly approached Simmons and asked, "Do you really think the third no-named will be the key for us to become the continent's economic powerhouse? It looks like we're just taking a huge risk to buy one sword. The plan doesn't seem realistic to me. I understand that it is an opinion coming from a mere knight who knows nothing about business, but I'm worried if this is the best we can do for Valentino," he said to Simmons. Simmons stopped and turned to the knight. The man standing next to him was a loyal knight of Valentino who had learned to manifest his aura under Valentino's support. He was an austere man with an angular face and unwavering eyes who had remained loyal to Valentino his entire life. "I understand what you were trying to say. And you're right. We may end up simply acquiring one sword after all this." "Then, why didn't you dissuade the Marquis and stop him?" the knight asked. "Because the fact that Lord Valentino has a goal he desires to achieve is more than enough for us to follow his decision," Simmons replied. "What do you mean?" The knight couldn't grasp Simmons's words. Simmons smiled, gazing at the knight's confused face. "What do you see when you look at Marquis Valentino? The wealthiest aristocrat of Cairo? Or the greed collector? He indeed goes by several names, but the fact that he had established such immense wealth to be called the wealthiest man of Cairo even after fulfilling his desires remains unchanged. His wealth didn't simply come from his father. He accumulated Valentino's wealth through his efforts, and it was his strong desire to possess the best items in the world that got him this far," Simmons explained. Marquis Valentino was indeed an interesting man. Surprisingly, his strong desire to collect the most expensive items came before he established his wealth. His motivation to expand his business and increase his wealth came from his intense passion for collecting extraordinary items. That was the beginning of House Valentino. The Marquis needed the money to build his collection without worries or hesitation. But now, the Marquis sought to expand his business across the continent. The man who was satisfied with his life in Cairo now dreamed of building a wealth large enough to influence the continent. The reason was simple. He needed the money to afford Roman's great swords. He concluded that he would need even more money than now if he wanted to buy Roman's sword in the future. Marquis Valentino is a person who earns as much as he spends. Thus, if our leader dreams of building vast wealth to control the continent's economy, we will support him with all our might. Remember this. House Valentino chose to remain in this small well called Cairo willingly because the Marquis was satisfied with his life here. He always had the potential to escape the well at his own will whenever he desired. He simply chose not to. If he dreams of expanding our business across the continent, it will be realized soon, Simmons added. The knight had goosebumps all over his body. Marquis Valentino was undoubtedly out of the ordinary. As people would say, there was indeed only a fine line between genius and madness. It was hard to tell where the Marquis belonged to. Nonetheless, the knight was certain he was no ordinary man. Unlike the third no-named, which would be sold at the auction house, Roman gave the two other swords as gifts to their new owners. "These are my gifts to you," said Roman. Chris and Kevin received the swords. They looked at Roman with eyes overwhelmed with emotions as they took the gifts. The swords' names are the first no-named and the second no-named. As you improve your martial arts and gain more insight, these swords will help you perfectly realize what you desire. Swords aren't just steel weapons. The more you learn to understand your sword and increase your strength, you will reach new heights, he continued. "Thank you, Lord Roman." "Thank you." But something about Kevin seemed odd. The young knight's blissful and bright smile instantly faded when he realized his sword's name was the second no-named. Kevin knew the sword was exceptional when he grasped its grip. Nonetheless, he couldn't be just happy. He tried to suppress his disappointment, thankful for Roman's gift, but couldn't. He couldn't suppress the jealousy and sense of inferiority blooming inside his heart. Eventually, he had to speak his honest feelings. "My lord, I understand that my request may sound out of line, but can I take the first no-named instead?" asked Kevin. Roman was a little surprised at Kevin's unexpected request. "Why so?" he asked. Kevin gritted his teeth and clenched his fists tight. He wanted to hide his honest feelings as much as possible but couldn't help. "Because I don't want anyone other than me to be called the first," he replied. It was an interesting situation. Jung-Heek Baek had experienced a similar situation back in his previous life. "I remember when the demon of lunacy caused us some trouble back before. At first, it started with a minor quarrel. While eradicating the evil faction in Murim, the blood demon argued they should first strike the enemy's headquarters. In contrast, the demon of lunacy argued they should chase after the fleeing enemies and annihilate all possible sower of discord. They both had a point. They could have quickly settled the dispute through a reasonable compromise, but the two refused to yield for some reason. The tension between the two escalated as they argued against each other. The blood demon was never fond of the demon of lunacy. Unlike most people from the demonic cult who respected him since he used to be the leader of the blood demon cult, the demon of lunacy, someone who used to be a nobody, showed no respect to everyone except Jung-Heek Baek. The blood demon had no intention of rebuking his genuine loyalty toward the divine demon. But thinking he had to put the demon of lunacy in his place, he refused to back down. Eventually, the two pulled their swords out. It only took a few seconds for the quarrel to escalate into a fight. A massive impact struck the grounds as the people watched the fight between the heavenly guardians in awe. In the end, the blood demon won. After the fight, he stared at the demon of lunacy on the ground with a resentful face. "I don't want to face you ever again," said the blood demon as he withdrew his sword. He had won the fight by a hair's breadth. The demon of lunacy's attacks were menacing indeed. The relentless way he went after the blood demon proved that he could have won the fight if he had started learning the martial arts a bit earlier. Through the fight, the blood demon proved he was more potent than the demon of lunacy. After the fight, the demon of lunacy returned to the demonic cult and kneeled before Jung-Heek Baek with a blood-drenched face. And when asked why he had challenged the blood demon, he gave an absurd response. "I wanted to test the blood demon's power. I've always dreamed of becoming your most reliable sword. Thus, there are no exceptions. Whether it be the blood demon or the sword demon, they are competitors I must defeat to realize my dream. So, I took this chance to test him," he said. Jung-Heek Baek didn't know what to say. Despite being titled the Heavenly Guardians, the demon of lunacy was obsessed with becoming the best. He wanted his name to be called first whenever Jung-Heek Baek called for his subordinates. Jung-Heek Baek didn't interfere then and even now because he knew power was essential in pecking the hierarchy between his subordinates. Not even the leader could interfere and decide. A hierarchy without power would inevitably face problems. After all, a stronger man couldn't follow orders coming from a weak. So, Roman Dmitri spoke the bitter truth to Kevin and allowed Kevin to decide. "I decide the owner of my swords depending on their competence. If you want to take the first, show me what you got and prove it to me." Kevin's eyes suddenly grew fierce. It was the answer he was expecting to hear. He glared at Chris at Roman's response. "I challenge you to a fight, Sir Chris." "I will prove that the sword in your hand belongs to me," said Kevin. One topic had been heatedly discussed between the people of Dmitri recently. Who do you think will win between Chris, the Flash of Dmitri, and Kevin, the Ghost of Dmitri? The two who had made meritorious contributions during the recent war against Kronos were naturally compared by the people. The people gave mixed opinions. Though the majority believed Chris would win the fight, some believed Kevin had a chance with his unpredictable moves. The citizens of Dmitri spent nights drinking while talking about the topic. Chris had also heard the news but wasn't concerned. After all, he was confident of his victory. Such a petty piece of news couldn't shake him. However, it meant a completely different story now that Kevin had provoked him to his face. The young knight's words got on his nerves. "Are you saying you can beat me in a duel?" said Chris. "Why not?" "I don't think it's impossible," Kevin replied. Chris grimaced in anger. His goal was always Roman Dmitri. The knight who had been chasing after the star had not once considered being surpassed by someone else. "All right. I accept your challenge. I'll show you why Lord Roman gave me the first no-named, not you," he added. The atmosphere grew tense. Like the day the demon of lunacy challenged the sword demon, Kevin and Chris stood facing each other to decide who was stronger. Chapter 3:14. The Greatest Masterpiece. Part 5. The sight seemed familiar. Chris recalled a past incident as he stared into Kevin's gaze. "That's right. It was just like this before. Unlike other people, you always saw me as a competitor," muttered Chris. This wasn't the first time Kevin challenged him. Years before, when Chris first vowed to serve Roman Dmitri, he had spent days complaining because Roman had never taught him anything despite his promise of loyalty. So, he openly expressed his anger at the young lord who was busy training Kevin. Instead of giving the teachings Chris requested, Roman surprisingly suggested that he should fight against Kevin. Evidently, Kevin didn't stand a chance against Chris. The knight brutally trounced him. However, even as blood dripped down his face, the young boy provoked the knight by saying, "Let's see what happens at the bitter end of this fight," said Kevin back then. Kevin was full of himself in Chris's eyes. The young knight was nothing but cocky. Though he later learned that Roman was helping Kevin with his telepathy during the fight, he could never forget Kevin's bold stare from that day. From that day, it appeared like everything was settled. Kevin faithfully obeyed Chris's orders from that day onward and never dared to challenge his authority. But occasionally, Chris noticed the same glare in Kevin's eyes. He could sense the strong aspiration and mixed feelings reflected in the young knight's eyes. Whether it be jealousy, a sense of inferiority, or ambition, the fact that Kevin considered Chris a wall he needed to surpass never changed. The way Kevin perceived Chris differed from others. Since Chris was always in charge of the training during Roman's absence, no one dared dream of challenging his authority. However, Kevin was different. Though following Chris's instructions during the training sessions, he tended to express his strong ambition to surpass the knight whenever hierarchy was emphasized. Chris was also aware of Kevin's feelings. It was hard not to notice Kevin's feelings reflected in his gaze, attitude, and behaviors. Kevin openly expressed them without hesitation, yet Chris ignored them. "I've always known how you looked at me from day one. But do you know why I ignored your provocative attitude? It was because it wasn't worth my attention. What kind of a foolish adult would respond to a child rushing to him in anger? In other words, you are nothing but a kid in my eyes. No matter what people call you here in Dmitri and praise you as the ghost of Dmitri, you will always be the helpless kid I saw on the first day." Chris pulled out his sword. Kevin glared back at Chris, who intentionally pointed the first no-name to his face. "Kevin, you still have a long way to go to catch up to me. My ambitions are too big to be caught up by a kid like you," said Chris. Whoosh. He manifested his aura. He had no intention of going easy against Kevin, who dared to challenge his authority and power. "So, I'll warn you now. Show me all you got. Prove me that you're not that same helpless kid from before." Tap. Roman took a step back. It was his signal for the duel to begin. Without adding any more words, the two charged at each other. Dash. Croar. Kevin swiftly dashed forward and dove his body. The young knight was fast. As Kevin rushed forward like a wild boar, Chris swung his sword forward. Flash lightning technique. Flash. Rumble. He had no intention of going easy on Kevin. It appeared like his deadly attack would strike Kevin's face as it shattered the space around it. Swish. But Kevin swiftly dodged the attack by a hair's breadth, predicting Chris's moves. Then, he exploded his aura and dove forward. Chris was already stunned by how Kevin easily dodged his attack. After all, in his memory, Kevin was nothing but an immature and inexperienced knight who couldn't even avoid the attacks despite predicting them. Kevin had undoubtedly grown so much more potent compared to his past. But that didn't mean Chris was the same. Chris had also dramatically enhanced his power during the past years. As soon as Kevin dodged the attack, Chris's blade suddenly curved like a snake and went after Kevin's neck. Slash. It was an attack developed by combining the flash lightning and Jonathan's secret techniques. The second Chris thought he won this fight, Kevin's eyes suddenly turned red. Then, he swiftly twisted his body. Chris couldn't believe his eyes. Kevin didn't even need to stop for even a brief second to dodge the attack. He twisted his body while rushing toward the knight, leaving the snake-like blade to slash through an empty space. It failed to even leave a cut on Kevin's flesh. The young knight perfectly avoided the attack, and a massive explosion erupted when he slammed his heel against the ground. Thud. Croar. Kevin used his mana surge to dash forward at lightning speed. As soon as he reached Chris, he pressured the knight with his attacks, refusing to give Chris a second to catch his breath. Clang. Clash. Clatter. The knights fiercely clashed against each other. Failing to land his attack on Chris's head, he swiftly turned his blade and aimed for the knight's side. But Chris was also fast. He quickly retrieved his sword and blocked it. Simultaneously, he swung his blade at Kevin's head. After dodging Chris's attack by leaning his body back, he sprung up from the ground and pointed his blade forward to pierce through Chris's heart. Clang! The two continued to exchange attacks, refusing to back away. They viciously charged against each other like wild beasts trying to tear each other apart. Swish. Rumble. Chris's aura sliced through the wind with a menacing sound. The attack sounded like it could tear apart the flesh just by brushing against him, but Kevin didn't hesitate to charge forward against the frightening attack. He clashed against Chris and attacked relentlessly. And since both used their auras when manifesting their martial arts, Chris evidently had the advantage because his aura was stronger. However, Kevin endured the pain and continued forward. He grinned as blood dripped down his mouth. Flash. A flash of light covered his eyes again. But Kevin dodged Chris's attack again, then poured his aura at Chris's face. Clang. It was as expected. Chris swiftly reacted to his attack. But the moment Chris raised his blade to block his attack, Kevin dove his body toward the knight's blind spot and aimed for his vital points. First, he went after Chris's head, then his legs. And without hesitation, he turned his body to strike his back, then his core. He fiercely moved around like a beast chasing after his prey's weakness and showed his claws to find even the tiniest opening. Kevin was fast and furious. His attacks were undoubtedly deadly. Chris attempted to counter back, but Kevin reacted to his attacks as if he already knew where he would target. At that moment. Flash. Rumble. Chris used his flash lightning technique once again. Kevin was forced back to avoid the attack. He knew he couldn't block it head-on. You indeed got stronger. I'll give you that, said Chris. Chris stomped forward, slicing through Kevin's aura. His fierce face genuinely seemed annoyed by Kevin's attitude. But that's all. You're no match against me, he provoked Kevin. Chris hadn't exerted his full power just yet. Kevin felt his flesh sting. Standing before Chris, his instincts constantly warned him how dangerous he was. However, he couldn't back away because he had been training for this very moment. I know Chris more than anyone else, even more than himself. Kevin had observed Chris for a long time to find a way to defeat him. For years, he had observed the knight's sword style and his particular habits when fighting against his opponents. It was thanks to his years of observation that he managed to dodge Chris's first strike. The flash lightning technique was an attack impossible to react to. But Kevin tilted his body and responded to the deadly attack by reading the particular movement of Chris's muscles and his stance before using the technique. He dodged it by a hair's breadth. He would have lost his head if he hadn't trained in advance. Kevin continued to dodge Chris's attacks, trusting his instincts developed over years of analysis. He intensely pressured Chris, using the information he analyzed in advance. Grasp. He gripped his sword tight. As he watched Chris approach him with an overly relaxed atmosphere, Kevin's mind was engulfed deeper into madness, with his eyes flushed red. Don't get too full of yourself, you jerk. Dash. Crowar. Kevin kicked off the ground and instantly closed the gap between Chris, swinging his blade at Chris's head. Clang. Chris easily blocked the attack and immediately engaged in a counterattack. Kevin read his movements and predicted his move. He's going to attack my right arm, the young knight whispered as he swiftly moved his body. The way he reacted to Chris's attacks was astounding. He didn't simply read the knight's movements but quickly caught the subtle movements of his muscles to predict Chris's moves. And with his senses enhanced through the ghost soul demon art, he swiftly dodged Chris's strike and attempted a counter. However, a severe pain rushed through his right arm when he was about to strike back. His eyes widened in shock. Splat. Blood splattered over the training grounds. He thought he had predicted Chris's move and dodged the attack, but Chris's blade had already left a shallow cut over his right arm. This time, he's coming for my shoulder. As Kevin predicted, Chris swung his blade at his shoulder. After raising his blade up high, he pounded Kevin with a series of lethal strikes. Once again, Kevin thought he perfectly predicted his opponent's movements and dodged them. But to his dismay, his shoulders were dripping with blood. The young knight frowned in pain. Slash. Kevin felt his body ache as blood continued to drip down his body. Chris was indeed fast. It turned out his provocation wasn't a bluff. The moment he decided to go all out against Kevin, he began to move at a speed not even Kevin could respond. Kevin's body shuddered as he watched Chris stand before him. Chris proved why he was the second strongest knight in Dimitri and how he earned the reputation as the Flash of Dimitri. The knight was undoubtedly formidable, which made it even more important for Kevin to defeat him. He had to win this fight to earn the right to own the first no-named. Grr, Kevin growled. As his red eyes turned even darker, he rushed at Chris with a face tainted with madness. Clang. Clash. Clatter. The two knights clashed again. They refused to surrender. Chris swiftly reacted to Kevin's attacks and countered back. Nevertheless, Kevin relentlessly chased after the knight at superhuman speed. At first, his attacks failed even to reach Chris. The knight easily dodged Kevin's attacks by predicting his movements. However, as time steadily passed, it appeared like Chris was barely avoiding the strikes. Swish. Crowar. Chris's blade swung right before Kevin's eyes. Even while being pressured by Kevin's attacks, the knight took his chance to strike back. However, Kevin tilted his head and dodged it. He was audacious. Rather than backing away to dodge the blade that could have pierced through his face, he chose to charge forward. The ghost of Dimitri was a monster, indeed. He succeeded in cornering Chris against the walls as he recklessly swung his sword with eyes smeared in madness. The divine demon sword technique, the first form of the early stage. Crowar. Rumble. Kevin exerted his full power to kill Chris but failed. Chris could no longer stand and watch. He intended to go all out at last. His face turned cold the moment he took a step forward. Let's end this, Chris said, glaring at Kevin. The second Kevin charged forward to land his final attack, he stepped into Chris's realm. His body was now left vulnerable within Chris's attack range. Before he could swing his sword, the world around him flashed with lightning. Lightning strike. Flash. Rumble. Before Kevin even realized it, severe pain struck his chest. In the blink of an eye, the young knight found himself collapsing to the ground. Kevin looked up while lying on the ground. Chris had won the fight, but he didn't seem happy. I can't believe this young kid from the slums has gotten this strong. Chris was genuinely stunned by Kevin's fight. The young knight had succeeded in pressuring him without even giving a second for him to catch his breath. He knew he would have lost this fight if he were his old self. So, he couldn't smile despite his victory. After all, the starting line between him and Kevin was different. Unlike himself, who started as an Aura knight, Kevin was nothing but a poor kid from the slums when he first joined Roman. That was why he never expected Kevin to surpass him. But he couldn't be certain anymore after the fight today. Chris was frustrated. The young knight who didn't stand a chance against him during their first fight, even with Roman's help, had now become powerful enough to threaten him. It wasn't that he wasn't aware of Kevin's growth. He always knew the young knight had dramatically improved himself, earning the title of the Ghost of Dimitri. However, he didn't expect Kevin to be this strong. He refused to accept it. Whip. Chris pointed his blade at the young knight to finish this brutal fight once and for all. But suddenly, Kevin began to weep once the sword pointed at his neck as blood continued to drip down his chest. Sob sob. He gritted his teeth, desperately trying to swallow his tears. Kevin didn't want to accept his bitter reality because not once did he doubt his victory when he challenged Chris. He believed he could win. No. He was desperate to win but lost. The ghost of Dimitri wept like a child, failing to conquer the mountain. Chris realized that Kevin was still a young teenager, watching the beads of tears drop from his eyes. Kevin tried to swallow his tears, refusing to embarrass himself, and slowly opened his mouth. I lost. The fight finally came to an end with Chris's victory. But for some reason, Chris felt devastated. He instinctively realized that the second he became complacent with his current self, he would one day kneel before this very young knight who refused to accept his loss. Chris no longer perceived Kevin as the same poor, young boy from the slums. Chapter 315. The Greatest Masterpiece. Part 6. Chris stood alone on the training grounds after the fight and gazed down at his blade with mixed thoughts. Why did I choose this path in the first place? He questioned himself, pondering over his mind. At that moment, he recalled a painful memory he had tried so hard to forget for several years. Chris saw his childhood self weeping in tears with his mother's corpse in his arms in the middle of a battlefield covered with dead bodies. Back then, Chris thought that would be the end of himself. He could never forget the shock that struck him as he watched his parents groan in pain struck by the enemy's blades. And the day Captain Jonathan rescued him, the young Chris had promised himself that he would become stronger than anyone else and never again put himself in such agony. Recently, Chris had undergone dramatic growth. Not only did he prove his worth across the continent by defeating Diego in the recent war, but enemies also shivered in fear whenever they heard his nickname, the Flash of Dimitri. It seemed like his dream was now just around the corner. He was confident he was approaching his goal closer and closer every day, not until he witnessed Kevin's desperate desire to surpass him today. Chris was genuinely stunned when he found Kevin trying to swallow his tears, refusing to accept his bitter reality. Chris projected himself into Kevin's shoes and imagined losing after challenging Roman Dimitri. He imagined how he would have reacted if he had lost against Roman. And he saw himself simply accepting his defeat instead of crying and denying the bitter reality like Kevin. After all, his loss was inevitable. From some point on, Chris found himself utterly mesmerized by Roman's powers and realized he couldn't even imagine surpassing the young lord. He slowly began to believe that winning against a monster who could easily subdue 300,000 imperial troops was impossible. It didn't mean he had given up surpassing Roman, but Chris already knew he was chasing after an unrealistic goal. Little by little, he began to compromise with his reality slowly. Chris had already become strong enough not to repeat his painful past, and no one could rebuke him for failing to achieve his goal. After all, Roman was the future strongest knight on the continent. Having Roman as his ultimate goal, he thought having at least one exception wouldn't hurt him. Since his growth and power came from Roman, Chris thought he could live on despite failing to surpass him. Damn it. He was ashamed and infuriated at himself. He realized how weak he had become before such an overwhelming person. And witnessing Kevin's pure, desperate, and ambitious cry, Chris's lost passion was again awakened. My dream may be impossible to achieve even after decades, but I, Chris, will not stop until I become the strongest knight on the continent, even if that means defeating Lord Roman, whom I dearly respect. I refuse to compromise with my reality, just like Kevin desperately tried to overcome his. He swallowed the bitter feeling inside his heart and used the shame as a motivation. Clench. He tightened his grip on the sword. He promised himself he would become even more robust than now so that no one could surpass him and fulfill his dream. The doctor frowned as he looked over Kevin's wounds in the medical room. "TSK. Why do you always use your body recklessly like this and come here wounded? But Sir Chris is outstanding indeed. It's unbelievable how he delicately slashed your body without harming your intestines." The doctor continued to nag on Kevin as he treated his body. He had also heard the story that Chris and Kevin got into a fight. And the outcome of it was Kevin's blood-drenched body. You may not be aware, but Sir Chris was already famous when he first came to Dimitri. Rumors about his handsome face and determined eyes had spread across the city. When he learned to manifest his mana at a young age after receiving Captain Jonathan's teachings, people in Dimitri praised him as the new prodigy. And he has proved his competence ever since. Though it's true that he became even stronger thanks to Lord Roman, Sir Chris would have made a name for himself either way, said the doctor. Years before Roman became famous, Chris was already praised as a prodigy. Though he may have been a mere frog of a small well in the eyes of the empires, he had proved himself different from others, such as Kevin, by learning to manifest his aura at a young age. But Sir Kevin, you are also amazing. To my understanding, Sir Chris doesn't normally harm his opponents in a duel, but I guess he realized he had to go this far to defeat you. Just look at your body, all drenched in wounds and blood. This was possible only because it was you who challenged Sir Chris. Others would have already passed out after taking one blow before they could get themselves injured like this, said the doctor. However, Kevin's mind was somewhere else. His mind was focused on Chris, who had been praised as a prodigy ever since he arrived in Dimitri, as the doctor's words echoed in the background. He and I have different starting lines. The knight, who had already made a name as a prodigy, dramatically improved his skills after meeting Roman. On the contrary, Kevin was nothing but a mere teenager from the slums, bullied around by the blood fang when he first met Roman. As a matter of fact, he didn't even know how to properly hold a sword until he received Roman's teaching. Though he had undergone immense improvement through Roman, it was fundamentally impossible for him to surpass Chris in the first place. After all, Chris was always a prodigy. So, Kevin faced his bitter reality today. He knew Chris hadn't exerted his full power even when he struck him at a speed impossible for him to react. The young knight felt devastated. He felt helpless, lost in his sense of inferiority. He felt ashamed for daring to pick on someone far more potent than him. More and more people like Chris will join Lord Roman. Ranked knights who have already made a name across the continent, such as Fernando, Ares, and Fred, are pledging their loyalty to him even now. And they will undoubtedly become even stronger while serving Lord Roman. Must I accept this bitter reality and use my helpless past as an excuse? Must I just sit here and accept my lack of strength because my starting line differs from theirs? Is this my destiny? Kevin questioned himself, staring at the ceiling. But in the end, he refused to compromise. No matter how dreadful his past may be, he desired to be Roman's most reliable sword. He couldn't give up on his aspiration. Kevin still remembered the day Roman rescued him from his life's abyss. Roman was like a string of light shining down into his dark and hopeless life. He was the first person who taught him what true hope meant. Kevin could never forget that very day. So, he desired to become Roman's most faithful subordinate in return and hoped Roman would seek him first when needing help. My humble past isn't important. Whether it takes a year or decades, I will surpass everyone except Lord Roman. I refuse to live a life of defeat. He gritted his teeth as he promised to become stronger. As Kevin pondered how to improve his power, one idea crossed his mind. The control phase. Kevin believed the only way for him to overcome his fundamental difference was by mastering the ghost soul demon art. The Adelian auction house was on high alert. It was because Roman Dimitri, Adelian's VVIP, requested an auction for his new sword, the third no-named. Get your acts together. I do not doubt that the third no-named will win a record deal in Adelian history. And for that reason, I have reached out to all our VIPs for this very day. So, keep yourselves on your toes today. If we end today's auction successfully, I promise to give you all a bonus. Yes, sir, the staff replied with a resolute gaze at Morris's words. A horde of people flooded the auction house since early morning. It wasn't just the VIPs invited by Morris, but average citizens also came to the auction house after hearing the news about Roman's new sword. However, not everyone was allowed to come inside. Only one item was being sold for auction today. And since its starting price was estimated to be at least 100 gold, average citizens were prohibited from participating. Visitors filled the seats inside the building. After a long wait, the auctioneer appeared before the crowd on the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your patience. As you know, today we will introduce you to Lord Roman Dimitri's new collection following his famous sword, Blaze. Its name is the third no-named. I want to give you a brief description of the sword before we begin. The third no-named has not only received a perfect score in its strength test but also a remarkable score in our newly developed mana sensitivity test. Unlike the usual mana sensitivity testing artifact, which is divided on a scale from 1 to 10, the new testing device is divided on a scale from 1 to 5 and has a more rigorous standard. We introduced this new device since Blaze scored perfectly on the previous test. And the developers who invented the new device said that if a weapon receives the highest scale on its mana sensitivity, it would undoubtedly become a treasure on the continent, said the auctioneer with a smile. He heated the atmosphere as people carefully listened to his words, heightening their expectations. That's right. The third no-named received the highest scale in our mana sensitivity test. Whoa. I knew it. The crowd was amazed. As everyone predicted, Roman Dimitri had again forged a sword that would stir the world. The atmosphere grew intense. The auctioneer slowly looked around the building and the faces of the VIPs before beginning the bidding. And now, we will begin bidding for the third no-named. We will begin with 100 gold, he said. As soon as he finished his sentence, whip, someone raised his hand. The man gave a signal to make a bid and a sign that he would bid 100-fold the beginning price. The auctioneer stood perplexed, at a loss for words. What in the world? Our first guest made a bid to pay 10,000 gold. When the crowd heard the price, everyone turned to the person who made the first bid. The face seemed familiar. The crowd held despondent faces, realizing that the person was none other than Marquis Valentino, the greedy collector. They knew what it meant when he decided to bid 10,000 gold. Bring it on. I'll crush anyone who dares to challenge me with my wealth. Marquis Valentino withdrew his house's jewelry business right after the meeting with his vassals. Informed that the third no-named would soon be released to the public in advance, he was able to prepare the money before attending today's auction. He also borrowed money from others to prevent even the slightest possibility of him failing to buy the sword. Marquis Valentino had prepared more than 10,000 gold for today's auction and bid 10,000 gold as his starting price to pressure others. His vassals had asked if he had to bid such a high price from the start before the auction. They suggested he should slowly raise the price to not waste unnecessary money. But the Marquis bluntly refused. The third no-name deserved such a price. As a true collector, he couldn't allow such a valuable item to be sold at a lower price than 10,000 gold. The Marquis knew the sword would never be sold for under 10,000 gold in the first place. Nevertheless, he displayed his firm determination by setting the record in the auction house. He felt the crowd's gaze centered around him. Typically, he would have calmly enjoyed the spotlight but couldn't today. He glared at the crowd to show them he did not intend to back away. 1, 2, and 3. 3 seconds instantly passed in silence. The auctioneer raised his voice, breaking the silence. 10,000 gold. 10,000 gold. And that's it. Our guest number 1 wins the sword for 10,000 gold. Congratulations. I didn't expect the third no-name to be sold this quickly at such a high price. Marquis Valentino sprung up from his seat in joy when he heard he won the auction. He clenched his fist tight, putting aside all pride. Oh yes, he shouted in joy. It was pure joy. The Marquis hurriedly ran up to the stage to take his new sword and called one of his knights. Arrange a meeting with all the nearby houses in the kingdom at once. Arrange one in the morning and another in the afternoon so I can meet at least 2 people daily. Why do you want to meet them, my lord? Isn't it obvious? I must brag it to them with this fascinating new sword under my possession. The Marquis couldn't stop smiling as he spoke. The knight listening to the Marquis's words was the one who talked with Simmons the other day. He looked at Marquis Valentino with worried eyes. I hope we're really doing this for the sake of our house. The knight couldn't stop doubting the Marquis's intentions. A few days had passed since Marquis Valentino bought the third no-named. By the time the news that stirred Dmitri steadily faded, Dmitri received a call from one of its signal bases. Beep. A soldier picked up the telegram but couldn't hear a single voice. After stating his affiliation, the soldier waited for a response, but no one said anything. I'll hang up if you have nothing to report, he said with a frown. And the moment he was about to hang up, an unstable sound buzzed from the telegram. Help us, prisoners. Arg. Tap. With those final words, the telegram was cut off. The soldier could barely hear the words. He had to match the words he heard to understand what the person was trying to say. If I heard correctly, the man said help and prisoner. It must be an urgent message requesting help. The soldier also confirmed that the coordinates of the location where the telegram was connected were from an area beyond the West battlefield. He instinctively knew that the person who called him was a prisoner of war held captive by the enemies.